Cheers, everybody, to, well, to nurses
Yeah.
everywhere and healthcare workers and people who are keeping the NHS going, which would have been really important to Florence, I'm sure. And cheers to all of you.
Cheers.
Cheers. Enjoy. I hope this is going to be enjoyable for you.
Yeah, we've got some virtual cheers going on.
Oh, nice. Cheers.
Okay, do you want to start?
Shall we get going?
Yeah.
Tim's going to do the rules bit because he's better at them than I am.
Yeah, so I guess first of all, by the nature of the fact you're watching this online, you're going to be able to cheat really easily. Okay, so you probably need to get some of the answers, to be honest.
But you'll only be cheating yourselves.
Yeah, this is a low scoring quiz. There's a few funny ones and a few
We'll see.
I think Louise has sort of gone back to form as a teacher, actually. So I think you'll probably learn quite a lot through the quiz that you probably didn't want to know, but you'll learn anyway. So what we're going to do is, so hopefully you've read the comments on the pub quiz page, and that's how you're watching this. If you can copy you don't have to send your answers in if you just want to just do it yourself on paper or whatever, that's fine. If you can copy the form from the quiz page and then open that in Word or Excel or Kingsoft or something like that, you should be able to just enter the answers in and then at the end submit them. Whilst we're doing the questions, we'll won't ask the question, we'll say the question, we'll repeat it, and then at the end of the round, we'll just quickly run back through them. Hopefully that should give you enough time. If you didn't hear it, Louise and I will both say the same question, so if you don't like the tone of my voice, some people at work can't really hear me sometimes, then hopefully you'll hear Louise's. Yeah, at the end, so a slight change. We realised that people would probably want to get the questions answered effectively at the end. So we'll have 5 minutes to submit the questions, which will be, if you can send it to music@louisejordan.co.uk. We'll repeat that later. And then we'll read the questions out afterwards. Yeah, generally, if you can comment on, the best place to watch this is on the YouTube page, because you can put comments there. If you're watching it on the pub quiz page, then you can comment on the page, but I don't think I'll get the comments as often. And as we said before, you can comment via Twitter and Facebook, and links for that are on. I don't think they're on YouTube, are they?
On the website? No, they're not.
They're on the website. Twitter is
@LJordanMusic. Look very good at that, haven't I?
And Facebook is just Louise Jordan.
Louise Jordan Sings on Facebook.
Okay,
good.
That's the logistics. There's 7 rounds, 6 questions, so hopefully it won't be too long.
So, round 1, let's kick off. This round is arts and culture. So, question number 1. Florence Nightingale enjoyed opera. Which composer was her favourite?
Okay, so that's Florence Nightingale enjoyed opera. Which composer was her favourite? So that's round 1, question 1.
So you need a name of a composer.
Yeah, make a guess.
Probably wasn't Ed Sheeran though, was it? Okay. Question number 2. Is that too fast? Question number 2. On her European travels, Florence fell in love with a famous painting in the Vatican by which artist?
So, on her European travels, Florence fell in love with a famous painting in the Vatican by which artist?
And question number 3. You can tell us in the comments if these are too fast as well. Question number 3. The song Dog Days Are Over was written by whom?
So the song Dog Days Are Over was written by whom?
to say Florence was more of a cat person. My second cousin, who is, I think, that's terrible, I should know, but I think just coming towards the end of primary school, had learnt about Florence in school. And when she found out that I was doing a project about Florence, she was like, "Oh, that's great. She was a crazy cat woman." So maybe that wasn't the best question.
No.
Dog days. But anyway, it's done now, isn't it? Question number 4. We had some debate about how to say this one. The Medicis were based in which famous Italian city?
So the Medicis were based in which famous Italian city? So that's sort of medieval gangsters, basically, who were
Medieval gangsters.
yeah, they were pretty nasty. Some of them were, yeah.
I'm learning
Yeah.
this evening with you.
And they're great supporters of the arts. And,
Yes, definitely.
and popes.
Benefactors. Okay, question number 5. Eggs Florentine describe eggs cooked with which other ingredient?
So eggs Florentine describe eggs cooked with which other ingredients?
I'm a big fan of this, but before I met him, I had never had this, which he was very surprised about, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, question number 6, last question of round 1. Which famous English actor who starred in Fight Club is related to Florence Nightingale?
So which famous English actor who starred in Fight Club is related to Florence Nightingale? Okay, so we'll quickly run back through those. Do you want to do it, Louise?
Okay. Question 1. Florence Nightingale enjoyed opera. Which composer was her favourite? Question 2. On her European travels, Florence fell in love with a famous painting, can't say that word today, in the Vatican by which artist? On her European travels, Florence fell in love with a famous painting in the Vatican by which artist? Question 3. The song Dog Days Are Over was written by whom? Question 4. The Medicis were based in which famous Italian city? Question 5. Eggs Florentine describe eggs cooked with which other ingredient? And question 6. Which famous English actor who starred in Fight Club is related to Florence Nightingale? How are you getting on with round 1? I hope that you were able. We tried to give a good spread of arts and culture, bearing in mind that it's a very wide field, really, isn't it? Brilliant. We'll move on to round 2, which is called Statistics, Stats and Facts. Did I come up with these rounds, or did you?
Yeah, you did.
I did.
Well, there's
okay.
one that I did.
Okay.
Should be obvious.
I might have been correct. Anyway, let's go. Let's go with it. Question 1 of round 2. What percentage of men died from disease compared to wounds in the Crimean War?
So it's a multiple choice question.
I've got that. Is it A, 15%, 1-5? Is it B, 80%, 8-0? Or C, 60%, 6-0?
So what percentage of men died from disease compared to wounds in the Crimean War? Was it A, 15%, B, 80%, or C, 60%? So British Army soldiers.
Of men in the British Army. And question 2 of round 2. How many out of 400 people in England were believed to have coronavirus according to yesterday's data? How many people out of 400 in England were believed to have coronavirus according to yesterday's data? Oh, did I?
Yeah.
I'm already disobeying the rules. Tim's
Yeah.
not enjoying this at all.
I'll just switch around. So question number 3. Recent reports suggest that the impact of COVID-19 on BAME, so it's black and minority ethnic groups, is greater? What proportion of deaths from COVID-19 amongst health and social care staff groups were from BAME workers? So it's a multiple choice again. Was it A, 7%, B, 17%, or C, 70%?
So recent reports suggest that the impact of COVID-19 on BAME, black and minority ethnic groups, is greater. What proportion of deaths from COVID-19 amongst health and social care groups were from BAME workers? A, 7%, B, 17%, or C, 70%?
Okay, bit of a, you're going to either get this or really not going to get it, depending on if you've got a bottle of it, I think. What is the percentage of alcohol by volume of No Petticoats beer, of which there is a bottle? So you might be able to just read it quickly. So a bit of a tip, it's from, oh no, you can't ask a question there. Yes, have a guess.
So we're looking for the ABV, the percentage on the bottle that you would have if you had a bottle of such a beer. And we'll give them a clue. It's to the nearest decimal place.
That's not a clue.
Not a clue. I thought it was. That would have helped me. Okay, question number 5. According to a recent survey, 60% of women wash their hands after going to the bathroom. What percentage of men wash their hands?
So that was, according to a recent survey, 60% of women wash their hands after going to the bathroom, toilet, however you want to call it. What percentage of men wash their hands?
And question number 6. Netflix increased its revenue in the first quarter of this year compared to the same period in 2019. By what percentage? Again, multiple choice. Was it A, 27%, B, 82%, or C, 219%?
So Netflix increased its revenue in the first quarter of this year compared to the same period in 2019. But by what percentage? Was it A, 27%, B, 82%, or C, 219%?
So that is question 6, the last question of round 2.
Okay.
So we need to go through all the questions,
Yeah.
Disobeying the rules once again. Round 2, statistics, stats and facts. Question 1, what percentage of men died from disease compared to wounds in the Crimean War? We're thinking of the British Army. Was it A, 15%, B, 80%, or C, 60%? Question 2, how many out of 400 people in England were believed to have coronavirus according to yesterday's data? Question 3, recent reports suggest that the impact of COVID-19 on BAME, black and minority ethnic groups, is greater. What proportion of deaths from COVID-19 amongst health and social care staff groups were from BAME workers? Was it A, 7%, B, 17%, or C, 70%? Question 4, what is the percentage of alcohol by volume of No Petticoats beer?
I think a little clue could be the two numbers add up to 7. You've got a few choices there. Just checking the ratio.
Okay. Number 5, according to a recent survey, 60% of women wash their hands after going to the bathroom. But what percentage of men wash their hands? Question 6, Netflix increased its revenue in the first quarter of this year compared to the same period in 2019. By what percentage? A, 27%, B, 82%, or C, 219%?
Okay, so Kirsty, yeah, we're making a lot of stuff up as well.
Hi, Kirsty.
So question 2, we've been asked to repeat. How many out of 400 people in England were believed to have coronavirus according to yesterday's data? So it's effectively what number in every 400 people is believed to have.
Brilliant. I think Kirsty's a little bit ahead of the game as well, because her other half is a statistician. So, I mean, would that help? Well, we've all got advantage in different areas, haven't we? So there we go. That's just life. I offer you this wisdom. Round 3. Let's move on. Travel and geography. Question 1. You can tell who came up with this question, probably some of you. Which Anglo-Saxon town did Florence Nightingale's good friend Sidney Herbert call as his home?
So that's which Anglo-Saxon town did Florence Nightingale's good friend Sidney Herbert call as his home? I think my parents and family will get this one.
Yes. Question 2. In which modern country did Florence Nightingale stay during the Crimean War?
So, in which modern country did Florence Nightingale stay during the Crimean War? So, question 3, Florence Nightingale's family published a series of letters that Florence sent home on her travels to which country in the years 1849 to 1850?
Florence Nightingale's family published a series of letters that Florence had sent home on her travels to which country in the years 1849 to 1850?
Okay, this is a real geeky question unless you're on Google. Name the Nightingale's 2 family estates.
I don't know. I don't know if that's a geeky one. Is it?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. That's a geeky one.
You need to read it again.
Okay. Yeah. Name the Nightingale's 2 family estates.
Okay, in which country, question 5, was Florence Nightingale born?
So question 5 in round 3, in which country was Florence Nightingale born? Last one.
So Florence Nightingale set up a training school for nurses at St Thomas's in London, St Thomas's Hospital. Which is the nearest overground station to St Thomas's?
So that question 6, the last question in round 3 again. Florence Nightingale set up a training school for nurses at St Thomas's Hospital in London. Which is the nearest overground station to St Thomas's?
So, okay, so that's where St Thomas's is now, where the Florence Nightingale Museum is.
Indeed.
They're doing a lot of online content. So quickly run through, you'll be glad to know we're almost halfway there. So round 3, travel and geography. Question 1, which Anglo-Saxon town did Florence Nightingale's good friend Sidney Herbert call as his home? Question 2, in which modern country did Florence Nightingale stay during the Crimean War? 3, Florence Nightingale's family published a series of letters that Florence sent home on her travels to which country in the years 1849 to 1850? 4, name the Nightingale's 2 family estates. In which country was Florence Nightingale born? And question 6, Florence Nightingale set up a training school for nurses at St Thomas's Hospital in London. Which is the nearest overground station to the modern St Thomas's Hospital?
And I should give a massive plug to the Florence Nightingale Museum, who I know are struggling actually financially. They're not being quiet about it, but they're inviting people to buy a ticket or donate a ticket for when they reopen. in advance to help them keep going. So, and they're also doing some really interesting talks. I think I missed one of theirs on Facebook this week. There's lots. If you want to drop us an email, I've started to collect a list of different links. If that's not being too geeky, that is. But anyway, for lots of online talks that are now available, like British Library, the Royal Army Museum did one today, which we're going to watch again together. But I watched a bit of it earlier on. It was really interesting because they all have different perspectives. So sometimes there's a nurse or an author, an academic, or a member of the armed forces or a nursing leader, and they all have different takes, so it's really interesting. I think I'm getting told to move on.
Yeah,
I'm getting the agitated
no,
nudge.
Yeah. But we wanted to say, keep on posting the comments, let us know what you're doing. We've always said, tell us what you're drinking. We've got a selection of Florence to get through, which I can't say any more about that. We've got some homemade pickled eggs as our pub snack.
Dear. That looks really murky on the camera.
Very good. But we've also got some cashew nuts from Mick Indani, from Father Augustine. I know some of you know him. A painting of Mick Indani behind us, and actually that's where the bottle opener comes from.
The gavel, which I haven't had to use yet. You're being very well behaved. Well done, everyone.
We've got some nice snacks that I brought back from Hong Kong. So I've got some peanuts with some dried fish, and one of my favourites, really delicious, with some sesame oil and sesame seeds, and that's jellyfish. Really good stuff.
As you can imagine, I haven't been enjoying them. I haven't tasted them. So round 4. What are you guys eating? Are you having snacks? Kirsty says that Helen's running out to make dinner. So, well, lucky you. That sounds pretty cool. Getting in a geeky pub quiz before somebody else makes you dinner. Take that one on board.
Yeah. Okay, so round 4 is about nursing. So, question 1: which other famous nurse served in the Crimean War?
Which other famous nurse served in the Crimean War?
How many NHS Nightingale hospitals have been planned during the coronavirus outbreak?
How many NHS Nightingale hospitals have been planned during the coronavirus outbreak? Tim is sitting on a squeaky chair. I'm not sure if you can hear that. I just started to annoy me. Anyway, number 3.
Which famous nurse died in World War I who reportedly said, "Patriotism is not enough. I must have no hatred or bitterness towards anyone"?
So which famous nurse died in the First World War who reportedly said, "Patriotism is not enough. I must have no hatred or bitterness towards anyone"? There is a statue of this personage in London near the Portrait Gallery.
And at Norwich Cathedral.
And at Norwich Cathedral. Is it a statue or a plaque? No,
it's one of them. A memorial, I think. Okay, question 4. What year was Carry On Matron released?
We're not doing impressions. I don't think that you'd enjoy that. Oh, I see Tim smirking. I'm worried.
Jason was planning to join in on this, and Sid James is one of the nicknames that he's got. So if you're there, Jason.
Jason?
Yeah.
I'm going to be asking you a question about that when this lockdown is over. Intriguing or just worrying? Right. Question number, did we get to number 5? Question number 5 of round 4. Which nurse of the First World War wrote the poem Perhaps, which Louise, I have set to music for my project, No Petticoats Here?
So which nurse of World War I wrote the poem Perhaps, which Louise set to music for her project, No Petticoats Here? Albums are available from our online shop.
Oh, you had to get a plug in, didn't you? Yeah. He knows I'm useless at it. I won't do it until this evening, so you're free from me, but when he gets a chance. So that we can buy more Florence beer, probably. We didn't buy it. It was donated, gifted to us when they realised. Okay, shut up. I'm going to give an answer away. Number 6 of round 4. What does PPE stand for?
So what does PPE stand for?
And not to get political, but a bonus question. Why don't we have it? Why would we? Why don't the people who need it have it? Right, shut up.
Okay.
We're going to repeat the questions for round 4, nursing. So number 1, which other famous nurse served in the Crimean War? Who who wrote her autobiography, which is very much available and easy to get hold of a copy. And number 2, how many NHS Nightingale hospitals have been planned during the coronavirus outbreak? Number 3, which famous nurse died in the First World War who reportedly said, "Patriotism is not enough. I must have no hatred or bitterness towards anyone"? Number 4, what year was Carry On Matron released? Number 5, I sound like a newsreader. Which nurse of the First World War wrote the poem Perhaps, which I have set to music for No Petticoats Here? And number 6, for round 4, what does PPE stand for? Let's check if we've got any questions of people who want a repeat of anything thus far.
So Bernie said, stick to the beer, Louise. I assume that means avoid the jellyfish.
Yeah.
And dried fish.
Definitely.
I don't think there's any other questions. Is anyone having any fun, interesting snacks? Anything exotic?
I'm trying to imagine.
Yeah. Is anyone watching in from outside of the UK as well? Might be
interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so we're over halfway, fortunately. You can guess who came up with this round. Round 5, military history. So, question 1, which 4 main empires took part in the Crimean War?
So which 4 main empires took part in the Crimean War?
Sorry, just in case you read that one up, there's one missing there. Okay, so the Crimean War is famous for the charge of which brigade?
The Crimean War is famous for the charge of which brigade?
Question 3. What piece of warm headwear was named after a place and battle of the Crimean War?
What piece of warm headwear was named after a place and battle of the Crimean War?
Who was Minister at War during the Crimean War and a close friend of Florence Nightingale?
People who are from Salisbury or have been in Salisbury might find that a little bit easier if they walk around with their eyes peeled, which I don't. So.
Yeah. And if you've made a note of the questions, we've given you the answer previously.
Okay. Yes. Where was that? So question 4 of round 5. Who was Minister at War during the Crimean War and a close friend of Florence Nightingale?
So question 5. After the Crimean War, Florence gained a reputation as an expert in military healthcare reform. Her advice was sought on which war fought between 1861 and 1865.
So question 5. After the Crimean War, Florence gained a reputation as an expert in military healthcare reform. Her advice was sought on which war fought between 1861 and 1865.
Creaking. Okay, question 6, last one. The barracks hospital that Florence worked in was built over what dangerous structure? Was it A, a mortuary, B, a sewer, or C, an ammunition dump?
So question 6. The barracks hospital that Florence worked in was built over what? A, a mortuary, B, a sewer, or C, an ammunition dump?
Okay, so we'll just...
To clarify that, the barracks hospital in Scutari during the Crimean War. So where Florence worked during the Crimean War,
Yeah.
or was based.
Okay, so quickly back through the questions. Round 5, military history. Question 1, which 4 main empires took part in the Crimean War? So like the 4 main belligerents. Question 2, the Crimean War is famous for the charge of which brigade? What piece of warm headwear was named after a place and battle of the Crimean War? 4, who was Minister at War during the Crimean War and a close friend of Florence Nightingale? After the war, Crimean War, Florence gained a reputation as an expert in military healthcare reform. Her advice was sought on which war fought between 1861 and 1865. And lastly, the barracks hospital in Scutari, where Florence worked, was built over what structure? A mortuary, A, B, a sewer, or C, an ammunition? So comment if you need any questions repeated. So Teresa's just said she's just noticed the painting behind us, which is of Mikindani Bay, which is a place in southern Tanzania in East Africa that we, many of us tuning in or taking part, have got lots of connections to. I've lived there for about 4 years in total, so it's second home, and Louise has been a few times, I think. 3 times, 4 times.
And so this behind us, if you can't see, the most appropriate place to keep a stash of beer is my piano. And so when I'm writing or when I'm trying to learn a piece and learn it from, like, get it in my brain so that I don't have to look at music and I can look at people and not be distracted when I'm performing, I have that. So sometimes when I close my eyes and play a piece that I've already written, that's the only thing I can see because it's so stitched in my brain. So I love it. It's brilliant. When are the questions about owls? We should have done an animal round. That would have been more family friendly, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Oh well, and Kirsty friendly.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Okay.
sorry about that.
That's...
oversight. Round number 6. I'm getting my nudge. So religion and theology.
Probably give some context to some of these, which I don't know. Like it was important for her.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So the reason we've gone for religion and theology is that Florence felt that she had a call from God to service during her late teenage years, and she felt that that calling was to do his work by saving lives, and actually saving as many lives as she could. So Florence's work and writings around religion and theology are really interesting. For me, I don't have a background in that area, so it's a bit more difficult to get my head around, but I'd still say it's really fascinating if you're interested in that. Is that enough context?
Yeah, it's enough context. So round 6, religion and theology. Question 1, in which village is Florence Nightingale buried, and after which saint is the church named?
So in which village is Florence Nightingale buried, and after which saint is the church named? If you happen to be tuning into my 7:40 a.m. Interview on BBC Solent, I did not choose the time, then I mentioned it. It's probably completely useless, but anyway, thought I'd try and give you a clue.
Okay, you didn't repeat it, but did you?
Oh, in which village is Florence Nightingale buried, and after which saint is the church named?
Question 2. On display in the same church is a cross that was made for Florence by soldiers who served in the Crimean War. What was it made from? Was it A, bayonets, B, cypress wood, or C, ammunition?
So on display in the same church is a cross that was made for Florence by soldiers who served in the Crimean War. What was the cross made from? A, bayonets, B, cypress wood, or C, ammunition?
Okay, so question 3, Louise has given a bit of a hint already. At what age did Florence Nightingale first believe that God had spoken to her?
Sorry about that. I'm not trying to wreck it. I'm just finding it hard to keep my mouth closed.
Yeah.
So question 3, at what age did Florence Nightingale first believe that God had spoken to her?
Okay. Question 4. Before the Crimean War, Florence trained at a school for deaconesses in which modern industrial German city?
So before the Crimean War, Florence trained at a school for deaconesses, nuns, in which modern industrial German city? I'm sure we'll give it to you if you get the other one, because people might have read about that. Anyway.
Yeah. Don't know which other one it is. Okay, so this is a bit of a long one. So, with which male theologian and MP who wrote The Subjection of Women and petitioned Parliament for women's rights to vote did Florence Nightingale correspond some 60 years before women were granted the franchise?
I think I came up with this one because it's so wordy. With which male theologian and MP who wrote The Subjection of Women and petitioned Parliament for women's right to vote did Florence Nightingale correspond some 60 years before women were granted the franchise? That was a bit of a wordy one.
Question 6. Which voluntary organisation that supports first aid and emergency medical services derives from a medieval order of knights?
So which voluntary organisation that supports first aid and emergency services derives from a medieval order of knights? I think he came up with that one. Yeah. So that was the last question for round 6, and we've got one more round to go.
So a bit of an update on the drink selection. So Julia and John, who live directly opposite the road from us, will give you a wave in a bit. Kia plum liqueur on ice. Interesting.
Where's that say that? Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Okay, so you'll be glad to know we are finally at the last. Did we repeat the questions?
No, we didn't, did we? Round 6. I'll go, whip through quickly. Question 1 of round 6. In which village is Florence Nightingale buried, and after which saint is the church named? Number 2. On display in the same church is a cross that was made for Florence by soldiers who served in the Crimean War. What was it made from? A. Bayonets, B. Cypress wood, or C. Ammunition? Number 3. At what age did Florence Nightingale first believe that God had spoken to her? Number 4. Before the Crimean War, Florence trained at a school for deaconesses in which modern industrial German city? Number 5. With which male theologian and MP who wrote The Subjection of Women and petitioned Parliament for women's right to vote did Florence Nightingale correspond some 60 years before women were granted the franchise? And number 6. Which voluntary organisation that supports first aid and emergency medical services derives from a medieval order of knights? There's so much I want to say about these questions, but I think we're being nudged.
Yeah.
I'm being nudged. You're not being nudged.
So Mike's moved on to the cider. I don't know if that was from the gin or from something else.
With the gin.
Yeah. Which reminds me of a very messy night in Exeter.
I was not there.
Diamond, white and gin. Good combo. Paul's on the
I
orange
have
squash.
more sense than that.
Yeah.
Oh, well done, Paul.
And Kirsty's on tea.
Hashtag rock and roll. You are rock and roll, Kirsty. We all know it.
Okay, so fortunately, last round.
Fortunately, I'm enjoying myself. I hope you're enjoying
are.
yourself and you're not feeling pressured to be speeded up by. Right. Number round 7. I promise you, this really is my first one. It just doesn't sound like it. So round 7 is called Last Orders. See what we did there? It's very subtle. So which brewery is responsible for the ale Florence, available during the week of Florence's bicentenary? So I was really lucky because I got in touch when I realised, and they said, oh, it's really exciting what you're doing. And I mentioned about the pub quiz, and they said, oh, we'll just send you a couple of cases. And I thought, oh, okay, that's really kind. And then we went to go for our walk a couple of days ago, and there were just 2 boxes on the doorstep, which was really kind of them. And I just nearly said their name again, but we'll tell you that in a minute, and you can maybe go and place an order if they've got any left.
Yep. So question was, which brewery is responsible for the ale Florence, available during the week of Florence's bicentenary?
Not for long.
Okay.
Number 2,
yeah.
the 3 Tons pub has existed near the Nightingale family home. Near Romsey.
That's a tip.
Since Florence lived there. I'm going to get the giggles now, it's terrible. The 3 Tons pub has existed near the Nightingale family home, near Romsey, since Florence lived there. To edit myself. An old English ton is how many gallons?
So the 3 Tons pub has existed near the Nightingale family home of near Romsey since Florence lived there. An old English ton is how many gallons? If you want to convert that to milliliters or liters or whatever you can.
I think the ironic thing about this project is that Florence was a numbers person and a statistician, and I'm terrible with numbers and measurements and anything like that. So it's quite funny because I would have no clue with that question. You can probably imagine who wrote it.
So a bit of a tip, I'm pretty sure that all imperial fluid measures from gallons upwards are a multiple of 8, I think.
I'm not sure that would help me either.
Maybe times it a couple of times and you'd get
a couple. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Question 3. What did Florence Nightingale say nuns should drink more of and soldiers less of?
So what did Florence Nightingale say nuns should drink more of and soldiers less of?
Is anyone finding this round a bit easier than the others? Question 4. How does Prosecco get its name?
So question 4. How does Prosecco get its name?
Question 5. Name the brewery that brewed No Petticoats beer in support of my previous project, No Petticoats Here, telling the stories of extraordinary women of the First World War. Tim probably wrote that because there's a little plug in there. Just waiting for him to say, albums are available under our
and beer, actually. We still have 2 cases.
No, that's not available. That's mine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we sold a few. So, name the brewery that brewed No Petticoats beer in support of Louise's previous project, No Petticoats Here, telling the stories of extraordinary women of the First World War. Bit of a tip, it's between Salisbury and Fordingbridge.
I'm not sure that's a tip for some people.
If you're on Google, then
yeah, okay. Don't be on Google. Don't spoil the fun. This is fun. And number 6, the last question of the last round. Florence Nightingale famously said, "A little gin would be more blank."
So
what?
Fill in the blank. Yeah, fill in the blank. Florence Nightingale famously said, "A little gin would be more what?" Okay.
So if there's a tie, we are going to use that last question and decide which is the most interesting answer. Just in case that would happen.
So
we need to go through that quickly.
Yeah.
So round 7, last orders. Question 1. Which brewery is responsible for the ale Florence, available during the week of Florence's bicentenary? Number 2. The 3 Tons pub has existed near the Nightingale family home since Florence lived there. The family home that's near Romsey. An old English ton is how many gallons? Question 3. What did Florence Nightingale say nuns should drink more of and soldiers less of? Number 4. How does Prosecco get its name? Number 5. Name the brewery that brewed No Petticoats beer in support of Louise's previous project, No Petticoats Here, telling the stories of extraordinary women of the First World War. And number 6, Florence Nightingale famously said, A little gin would be more what?
Okay, so if you want to comment or get any more questions, then please do now. We'll start the clock ticking, so if you can submit your answers within the next 5 minutes to be in line for a prize. Please email them within the next 5 minutes to music@louisejordan.co.uk.
So music@louisejordan.co.uk, and remember, Jordan is with an A.
So if you can do that. If you've got any questions or comments in between, please ask them. If you want to know more about Florence or the album or
I'm not sure
anything
I could answer.
else, I think you've basically got more information about Florence than you probably ever wanted.
No, don't agree with that.
Yeah, okay.
I want more information. I've been listening to talks all week and doing lots of online activities, and I'm still learning all the time. If you want to find, I can do a plug here. If you want to find out what I've been up to this week, on the website, there is a sort of sub list. If you hover over the Florence tab at the top, there's like a drop down list. And I've put a link there to some of the activities. So sort of the Listen Again interviews, and Neil Smith, who's a Salisbury-based illustrator that I met at the TEDx talk in Salisbury, really kindly, we did a sort of share. So he agreed to do some illustrations for some of my tweets that I wanted to put out this week. And in return, I'm going to make him some jingles for his new podcast. So we did a creative exchange, but I have to watch The Life of Brian to get the tone right. So I'm sure you'll find that amusing, maybe, to think of me doing that. I don't know. And what else? Yes, there's all those wonderful images that Neil created are all on there. And I've also done some workshops for the first time ever, filming myself, which is a really strange experience. I know that the guys over the road are watching you. I don't know if you saw me do any of that, but it was really quite strange to do. So there are workshops. If you know anybody that works in a school or anybody who's homeschooling, I'm not taking those down. The video workshops are the 22-minute one, and that's designed for people who are homeschooling or educating children in schools or other facilities at the moment. And it's a 20-minute workshop which takes you through a 5-step songwriting challenge to create your own song. So hopefully watch that and create their own songs, which would be lovely. And then I'm doing a series of 5 workshops for anybody who's maybe written songs before or just starting to songwrite, but it's not just for songwriting people to go through my sort of songwriting process. It's also people who are interested in history. Obviously, I talk a lot about Florence and the songs that I've written about her in the process. So you might find that interesting, how I did the research. I think I've waffled long enough. Are there any questions that people would like?
We've been asked for the email address. I've posted it into the chat stream, but it's music, MUSIC, @LouiseJordan, so LOUISEJordan.co.uk.
Good. So maybe people, have you found out anything interesting about Florence Nightingale this week? I mentioned the British Library chat. I haven't seen a watch again link for that one yet, but I'm sure they will. And the British, the National Army Museum talk today really was interesting. In the British Library one yesterday, 2 of the speakers were authors whose work I drew on when I was writing the project. So Mark Bostridge, whose book we are currently leaning this computer on, I just realised. Mark Bostridge and Lynn MacDonald are 2 academics who've done a lot of work, but particularly Lynn, actually, who's, I think, a doctor, an academic doctor in a field of statistics. And she's done a lot of work archiving Florence Nightingale's papers, so letters and things like that, to make them available online. created a digital archive. So that's really interesting. And they both had lots to say, but there was also a nursing leader who was talking, and she said some really interesting things about how Florence's work relates to people who are working in healthcare and nursing at the moment. So she talked about PPE. She talked about how Florence would have what's the expression she used? It was really funny. I might have geekily written it down. I definitely geekily written it down. She said some really interesting things. So her name was Anne Marie Rafferty. I don't know, Paul, or any nurses watching might have heard of her and know of what she does. But she said Florence Nightingale would have been all over the COVID-19 crisis like a rash. And she said she would have taken charge. She would have insisted on the line of accountability, overcoming bureaucracy. She said that Florence would have given Boris Johnson a roasting, which I found hysterical, and she would have led a response on the sort of global stage, which is what she did, was joined up thinking. So I think amazingly we would have really benefited from Florence being here right now.
So a bit of on the chat, I think Kirsty's not too hopeful that she's going to get.
Oh, Kirsty will be fine.
Definitely hasn't used Google. So Mike didn't know about her connection to gin. I think she mentioned it a few times in different things, didn't she?
Yeah.
Paul, yes, we've got your email. So I've got the inbox open at the moment. Jane said that she was going to start revising yesterday. She doesn't think it helped. Paul's given away one of the answers, or half of the answer. So if you were struggling, then he's got the comment on which on where she was wished to be buried.
But there wasn't a question about it. Her family were offered a burial for her in Westminster Abbey, as you say. But Florence's request of her family was to make sure that didn't happen. She didn't want a state burial. She wanted a quiet one where her family's ancestors were buried. So yeah.
And Mike was just asked, is that Lynn MacDonald who wrote the book on the World War I letters?
Ooh, I don't know.
But he's had to drop out. So.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll have to drop you an email about that, or a message on Facebook. But that's interesting. I wouldn't have thought so, but I don't know. Maybe there's two Lynn MacDonalds, because your Lynn MacDonald had an A, but this Lynn MacDonald, although she spells Lynn the same way, is an MC MacDonald. I don't know. But I'm definitely going to look that up later and order another book because I really need more. Tim doesn't think I need any more books. Kirsty will agree that I need more books. Who else is on my side? I always need more books. If anything, they're useful for when you're in a global pandemic and you need to prop up your laptop so that you can do a live pub quiz. So you have to plan for these things.
Okay. Been about 9 minutes. So.
Okay, time's up. I hope you've all emailed your questions in. I can see a number. Yeah, okay, great. I hope you've all had time to do that. There are some interesting comments on the subjects of the things. Do another refresh to make sure that anybody. Oh yes. Brilliant. Okay. Well, thank you all for taking part. It really isn't the winning that matters, is it? It's the learning experience.
No, it's all about winning. Okay, so we'll go just back through the questions and answers now then. Yeah.
Oh, do tell us if you're surprised by any of the answers, or if you think they were too hard, because it'll be fun to do another one.
But maybe. Not about Florence.
Maybe not. Although there could just be an animals about Florence round for Kirsty, and then yeah. Anyway.
Okay, so round 1, arts and culture. Question 1: Florence Nightingale enjoyed opera. Which composer was her favourite? My favourite, Mozart.
And also Martin Carthy's favourite, which when he came and did our Forest Live gig, he told us afterwards. And I wasn't, yeah. He took Tim's side in the Mozart Beethoven debate that we often have. Anyway, question 2. On her European travels, Florence fell in love with a famous painting in the Vatican by which artist?
Which was Michelangelo.
Yeah, and so Florence had a copy of that painting. She didn't have very much adornment on her walls. She kept with this idea that everything should be clean and sanitary in her house. So she didn't have curtains, for example, or they were very minimal. And this was one of the few things that she did have on her wall, which I found really interesting. But she fell in love with it, and she's very much a supporter of arts. Question 3. The song Dog Days Are Over was written by whom?
And that was Florence and the Machine. About 8 years ago, something like that, maybe?
Oh, I think longer. Somebody
Getting
can
old.
Google and tell us. We are getting old. Should less of that. Question 4. The Medicis were based in which famous Italian city?
It was, of course, Florence.
We weren't very subtle. Like, hopefully you got that a lot of the answers are about Florence. Eggs Florentine describe eggs cooked with which other ingredient?
And that's with spinach. So which famous English actor who starred in Fight Club is related to Florence Nightingale?
And the answer is Helena Bonham Carter. So the Bonham Carter archive is deposited with Hampshire Record Office, and it was there that I really sort of first started to look into the archives about Florence and saw letters that she exchanged with her cousins who were Bonham Carters. So that's the connection. But also for Salisbury-based and interested people, it was Edith Bonham Carter who worked at one of the nursing hospitals in Salisbury, not actually Salisbury Infirmary, who Florence corresponded with about helping Salisbury to improve its training and support for nurses in her later years. So another Salisbury connection for Florence that you probably didn't want to know. Round 2, statistics, stats and facts.
Yep. So question 1, what percentage of men in the British Army died from disease compared to wounds in the Crimean War? Was it A, 15%, B, 80%, or C, 60%?
It was B, 80%. And if you come to see the live show, which will tour in February next year, you might want to keep hold of that one, and then you'll be better than all the other people in the audience because you'll know. So there we go.
Yeah, I think as well that 80% was in a war which had some really quite high casualty rates in the battles and a long siege. So that's a really very high rate.
Preventable disease and infection. That's what Florence was so frustrated by during her experience in the Crimean War, and what she worked so hard on in statistical representation of data afterwards. Yeah,
and yes, she probably was glad she wasn't born in Timbuktu and named after there.
Yes.
There are some other places which would probably be worse.
Jane's on my side. Give you the link for books. Yes, books, all the way books. Yeah. I don't know where we're at.
Okay, so how many out of 400 people in England were believed to have coronavirus according to yesterday's data? So it's basically 1 in 400 people were believed to have coronavirus yesterday.
Question 3. Recent reports suggest that the impact of COVID-19 on BAME, Black and minority ethnic groups, is greater. What proportion of deaths from COVID-19 amongst health and social care staff groups were from BAME workers? Was it A, 7%, B, 17%, or C, 70%?
So we've actually got the answer was 71%. So whether it was 70 or 71, we'll have to check. But yes, that is the total. It's really high compared to the percentage of the total workforce is 20%, but with a 71% fatality. So
there's been a couple of, and I haven't gotten around to listening to it, but there's been on Radio 4 a couple of programs that have looked at addressing and finding evidence around that and looking at causal factors. So I'll be really interested. I'm sure that details and information will come through after that. But I mean, it says a lot. It's such an interesting statistic. And yeah.
Question 4, what is the percentage of alcohol by volume of No Petticoats beer? So if you made a guess, pick two numbers which added up to 7, you might have gone for 4.3%.
You might have gone for 3.4%.
Or 6.1, or 5.2, or 2.5.
1.6.
Or you could keep on going, yeah. Anyway, so it's 4.3%.
I'm showing my skill at maths,
Yeah.
It's exciting.
Basically, it was a rebranded, No Petticoats beer was rebranded Honey Blonde.
Yes.
So if you happen to live in the area, I don't want to give away one of the answers, but it's
Well,
good.
You can now.
Good. They're doing home delivery as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Question 5. According to a recent survey, 60% of women wash their hands after going to the bathroom. What percentage of men wash their hands?
Put in the comments whether you'll find this interesting. So what percentage of men wash their hands? It's 38%. Are you surprised by that? I'm interested.
Yeah, only 60% of women. I was quite surprised by that, Kirsty, as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've started, well, not started because I'm not in public loos, but as soon as the news of coronavirus came out and I was still working in different venues, I was standing and watching people not wash their hands, and I was pretty freaked out, to be honest. I really hope there's a change happening. And number 6 of round 2, Netflix increased its revenue in the first quarter of this year compared to the same period in 2019, but by what percentage? A, 27%, B, 82%, or C, 219%?
And the answer was A, 27%, which probably, if it was the next 3 months, would be much higher because January wasn't really locked down. So
yeah, that's true.
Their profit went up way more than that because obviously their fixed costs are sort of there, but they just like crazy, sort of in the hundreds of percent.
By the way, I will just be really honest here. When Tim said put down 219, I was like, but that's more than 100%. And for those people who know how mathematically challenged I am, that was a difficult one to work through.
Okay, moving swiftly on.
Round 3, travel and geography.
Yeah, so which Anglo-Saxon town did Florence Nightingale's good friend Sidney Herbert call as his home? Which was, or is, Wilton.
Wilton. And there's a statue of old Sidney in Victoria Park in Salisbury, isn't it? Is it? Yeah.
Victoria Park.
Victoria Park, near Old Sarum. Anyway, we can talk about this later between us.
And there's a hall in the town named after him.
That's right.
In Wilton. In which modern country did Florence Nightingale stay during the Crimean War? Bit of a tricky one here because if you thought she was in the Crimea, she wasn't. So the hospital was in Scutari, which is basically in Istanbul. So it's actually Turkey. And
we are hoping to visit when we can. And we were hoping to visit later this year, but perhaps it might be later.
So the barracks, if anyone's going to Turkey, I know a lot of people here have got a connection with Turkey. You can go and visit the barracks. It's still a military base, so you have to arrange to go there, but you can visit some of the wards and buildings that were there.
And there's a Commonwealth War Grave Commission cemetery there, but I don't think many of the nurses who died, who were part of Florence's team, I don't think many of those graves, if any, are still there, because I tried to get in touch with them to find out, and I don't think that there are, sadly.
I don't think it would be Commonwealth War Graves.
No, it wouldn't be in there, but no, on the site. We can have this debate later.
Okay.
Question 3 of round 3. Florence Nightingale's family published a series of letters that Florence sent home on her travels to which country in the years 1849 to 1850? This is a book I haven't yet got around to buying, but it's been published a few times, and it's her letters home from Egypt. So Florence was quite well travelled. Of course, she was quite privileged, but she was born on her parents' extended 2-year honeymoon, I believe. But then she travelled with her family whilst the family's home near Romsey was being done up. But she did quite a few travels with family friends like Selina Bracebridge. and they did lots of travels to different countries. I'm getting the nudge that I'm being too geeky, but I think it's interesting.
Okay, next question. Name the Nightingale's two family estates. So one is Lea Hurst, which is in Derbyshire, and the other one is Embley Park, sorry, which is near Romsey. That's one near Romsey. It's now a school, and Lea Hurst is, I don't know.
I don't think it's possible to visit. Derby museums are doing quite a lot of online bits and pieces because they had an exhibition which was due to open the day that lockdown happened. So they ran, I think they went manically around the museum trying to film different pieces so they could put some stuff online during the lockdown. But I think their exhibition is going to continue running. There's lots of brilliant museums that are going to leave their exhibitions about Florence running into next year as a result.
Yeah. So question 5, in which country was Florence Nightingale born? Which was Italy, which was born in Florence. Question 6, Florence Nightingale set up a training school for nurses at St Thomas's in London, which is the nearest overground station to the modern St Thomas's Hospital, and that is Waterloo. So if you go out of Waterloo, go towards the IMAX and keep going a little bit, it's just there. Okay, round 4, nursing. Which other famous nurse served during the in the Crimean War? So it's Mary Seacole, and as Louise said, she's rocking the table as she's opening her beer.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, so she published her work. There's been some controversy about it because I think she was from Barbados, half.
I think it's really interesting. Yeah. It's way too much to go into in detail, but there's a lot of questions around whether the two women met, whether they were supportive of each other's work, and again, Lynn MacDonald's given some quite comprehensive thought and come down on one side of the argument, but I wouldn't want to go into it without going into it fully, really. But I think, wow, Mary Seacole would be an incredible woman to write a show about, or to just research and find out more about. Yeah, so I won't say any more about that because it will just be dull if I rabbit on without actually giving you any information. Where are we?
Okay, so that was the last one on that round. Next one, round 4, nursing.
No, that
we've done that one.
Question 1.
Sorry.
Round 4.
Question
really
2, how many NHS Nightingale hospitals have been planned during the coronavirus outbreak? The answer to that is 7. They haven't all been sort of commissioned and completed, but planned were 7. Actually, NHS Nightingale in London, so my factory is just sort of behind me, where I think some of you guys watching work, and some of our equipment that we've made has gone into those factory hospitals.
Question 3 of round 4. Which famous nurse died in the First World War who reportedly said, "Patriotism is not enough. I must have no hatred or bitterness towards anyone"? So that was Edith Cavell.
And that was where he said there's a statue near
the National Portrait Gallery, yeah.
And Norwich Cathedral, because she came from Norwich, I believe. Question 4, what year was Carry On Matron released? That was 1972.
Question 5, which nurse of the First World War wrote the poem Perhaps, which I set to music for No Petticoats Here?
That was Vera Brittain.
And question 6, what does PPE stand for?
And Louise didn't get this question right when we started the quiz.
Sorry.
It's personal protective equipment. Round 5, military history. Which 4 main empires took part in the Crimean War? It was the British and the French. It was the first time we really fought together, and the British commander kept on referring to the enemy as the French, to his French colleagues. We were allied to the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish Empire, and we were fighting the Russian Empire in the Crimea, which is part of Russia.
I think I'm going to have to stop him talking on this.
Yeah, okay, I'll rush through. The Crimean War is famous for the charge of which brigade? If you're a real military history geek, you'll probably say both the heavy and the light brigade. But for most people, the light brigade is the most famous one.
Number 3, which piece of warm headwear was named after a place and a battle of the Crimean War?
And that is balaclava.
I was going to give you all a tip and do this.
Yeah, so they're formerly called a balaclava helmet, actually. That's the place and the battle.
Question 4, who was the minister at war during the Crimean War and a close friend of Florence Nightingale? That's Sidney Herbert, who somebody's recently published a really dense biography about. So yeah, check that out with caution.
Yeah. So after the Crimean War, Florence gained a reputation as an expert in military healthcare reform. Her advice was sought on which war fought between 1861 and 1865, which was the American Civil War.
Number 6, the barracks hospital that Florence worked in was built over what? Was it a mortuary, a sewer, or an ammunition dump? It was B, a sewer.
Okay, next round, religion and theology. In which village is Florence Nightingale buried, and after which saint is the church named? So the village is Wellow in Hampshire. East Wellow. And the church is called St Margaret's of Antioch.
Question 2. We had a little debate about that one yesterday. Question 2. On display in the same church is a cross that was made for Florence by soldiers who served in the Crimean War. What was the cross made from? Was it A, bayonets, B, cypress trees, or C, ammunition? It was C, ammunition.
Yeah. And when lockdown ends and you can go out and visit places, the church there had quite a lot of funding a few years ago, and they've got quite a good exhibition inside the church and a few other artifacts in her grave and things. And
also Paul mentioned about Florence saying in her will that to her family that she didn't want to be buried and have a state burial. Interestingly, on her grave it only appear her initials FN, not her full name, which I found quite interesting when we visited.
Yeah, and it's very close to Carluccio's.
Oh yeah,
ice cream parlour.
Carlo's.
Sorry.
Carlo's. Has anybody been to Carlo's? Come on, in the comments. You have to. If you're ever, you have to.
Yeah.
I used to like on Fridays. So as a child, we would go there, and on Fridays, like every day, there was a given flavour, and on Fridays it was like a new flavour that they would just. So good.
Okay, so at what age did Florence believe that God had spoken to her? And the answer is 17.
Number 4, before the Crimean War, Florence trained at a school for deaconesses in which modern industrial German city?
So that's in Düsseldorf. So at the time it wasn't part of the city, but as the city expanded, it's become part of it.
So interestingly, I think, I'm getting the look, I think it's interesting. Florence really didn't have very much training as a nurse, and her family disapproved of her wanting to go to that profession because at the time it wasn't really well regarded. But she could escape with the friends of the family, and without her parents knowing, a few times went to this training school to find out how they were, as a religious institution, how they were looking after and providing healthcare. So she didn't really have very much or any official nursing training before the war, but she did have some understanding from the various visits and things that she did.
Okay, so with which male theologian and MP who wrote The Subjection of Women and petitioned Parliament for women's rights to vote did Florence Nightingale correspond some 60 years before women were granted the franchise? And that was J.S. Mill.
I've got the book. I just need to read it. I just need to have a bit more time. But interestingly, I think again, people quite often say Florence couldn't possibly have been a feminist because she didn't think women should be doctors, and I think that's sort of a misinterpretation of some of her writing. But also she thought that women having economic independence through having a profession that they could work in would be more beneficial than her using her energy to fight for the vote, which other people were doing. So she turned down J.S. Mill's invitation to be part of one of the London women's franchise organisations, although she did sign the petitions that J.S. Mill put to Parliament. I think she just saw what she could contribute to the cause as being sort of different from what other people were doing and getting the look.
Yeah. Which voluntary organisation that supports first aid and emergency medical services derives from a medieval order of knights, and that's St John's Ambulances, St John's Ambulance, so the Knights of St John of Jerusalem, or the Hospitallers, I believe they're called.
And round 7, last orders. I hope you're sticking with us. Have we got comments?
Yeah, I think everyone's turned off then.
I think you probably have. I don't blame you, to be honest. So round 7, number 1. Which brewery is responsible for the ale Florence, available during the week of Florence's bicentenary?
And it's Thornbridge, which is up north somewhere.
It's really delicious, and they were
Very
really
nice.
kind. And I'm looking forward to investing in some of their other beers at some point.
So the 3 Tons pub has existed near the Nightingale family home of Embley Park near Romsey since Florence lived there. An Old English ton is how many gallons? And that's 252 gallons.
I was looking at comments, sorry. What did Florence Nightingale say nuns should do more, to drink more of, and soldiers less of? Alcohol. So she quite often would send as sort of hampers of healthy food, but also things like port, a gin, to nuns, because she thought they could do with it. And then obviously soldiers should drink less. She worked quite hard to provide healthy activities for soldiers in the Crimea, and also in India and other places where the British Army was based, because she thought they should have activities to do to stop them from drinking. And she also set up a postal service so that the men could send their wages home to family, rather than having all the money with them and the temptation to go and drink and buy unhealthy foods and things from the local bazaars. So she was quite proactive in setting up writing libraries, things like that, for soldiers.
So how does Prosecco get its name? Answer. It's basically named after a village in the middle of the sort of area responsible for most of the wine growing.
We're talking. I don't think
know.
people will hear.
I thought there's more.
No.
I think the word, it comes from like old wood or something like that. But it's where they cleared the woods away to make the vineyards.
The answer was that we were looking for was that it was named after a village.
Name the brewery that brewed No Petticoats beer in support of Louisa's previous project, No Petticoats Here, telling stories of extraordinary women of the First World War. There's Downton Brewery. Of course, there were 2 breweries in Downton, but it's Downton and not Hopback.
It's got absolutely no relation, for people who aren't in the area, it's got absolutely no relation to.
But if you are
What's
in the area,
that famous TV programme?
Downton Abbey. It's
Downton
not,
Abbey, which I clearly haven't watched.
But if you live within, I think, 10 miles of Downton in Wiltshire, they're doing home deliveries, and their beer is really good. And lastly, finally, thankfully,
Florence Nightingale famously said, "A little gin would be more." What? I'm so excited to read your answers to this. She said, "A little gin would be more popular." And that's what's on the merchandise that the Florence Nightingale Museum are selling. So just in case you were interested in supporting them.
So for that one, Kirsty had Sterile, a little bit more gin.
Yes, it would.
Actually, Downton has a distillery, and they've moved to making hand sanitizers.
Yeah, I don't know how.
I don't know. I can easily open up any other answers. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll find those out, and we'll be interested.
Okay.
Well done if you gave an answer anyway, because that's quite a strange question, really, isn't it?
And well done if you got any single answer correct in the
yes.
quiz.
Apart from Italy, I mean, I think hopefully. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much for taking part. I've enjoyed it. I really hope you have as well. And thanks for all the. I know that there are a lot of people that have taken part this evening who have also supported other things that I've been doing online. Very frustrating not to be able to do the live show this month, but I know I'm really looking forward to sharing the albums and the booklets when they do arrive and getting them posted out, and also getting the live show on the road, and yeah, doing more workshops and things. So thank you for all your support, for those of you who have been able to share and tell other people about that. Thank you.
Yeah, Okay, so we're about 10 seconds in front of you, so we'll say goodbye, but then we'll just leave the chat on for a little bit if you've got anything else you want to say. Otherwise, sorry for taking up
so much of your
like
evening.
1 hour of your life.
Well, more than an hour.
Yeah, more than an hour.
Anyway.
So please go on.
Thank you.
Enjoying
Cheers.
yourself.
Have a lovely weekend. The weather's
Stay
meant to be
safe.
good in the UK, so thank you.
Good night.
Cheers. Bye.